Good evening. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm your host, Dennis Ward. Our guest this week is Sheila North Wilson, the Grand Chief of Manitoba, Keewatinowi, Okimakanak, commonly known as MKO. She represents more than 30 First Nations in northern Manitoba. North Wilson was elected in 2015 as the first woman to hold the position of Grand Chief for MKO. Originally from Bunabonabee Cree Nation in northern Manitoba, the MKO Grand Chief was a journalist when she decided to run for the role. Grand Chief, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today on Face to Face.
Thank you for having me.
What was it that compelled you to jump from journalism into politics?
Well, ultimately, it was a call for duty to serve. When I was thinking about it, I was at a stage in my journalism career that I felt like that I had to do more for our community because I learned the issues and I understood them, and so it was almost it was almost a natural transition to what I was doing and thinking at the time in my life. And then people started asking me to run, and I seriously thought about it. Talked to my family, talked to my community, talked to students in Bunabonabee at a school, and I heard myself saying that you have to go succeed, come back, and contribute to your own community. So I heard myself say that. Just before I made the final decision, but the last conversation I had with an elder was that she said, you know, don't take it as a compliment that you're being asked to run for Grand Chief. Take it as it's your responsibility. And so when she said that, I was like, well, I have to then. And so that's ultimately why I decided to run.
As I mentioned, you were the first woman ever elected as Grand Chief of MKO. What did that mean for you, and do you think other women out there?
Well, I didn't make that a priority to run as a woman or as a female or anything like that. I ran as a human being who had a heart for our community and our people. And so that was my first and foremost. And the issue of me being a woman didn't actually come up a lot during the campaign, other than through a media outlet and one of the other candidates. So, you know, I didn't feel that pressure to run as that or even address that. But being the first female Grand Chief, it is a great honor, and I think I'm more proud of the chiefs and the councillors that made it happen than for me, because it was them that made that decision. It was them that had the power to make that happen, and they did. And so I'm very honored and proud to be that, and also to work with the chiefs and councils that I do and the people.
Have you heard since your election from some youth about, you know, being, I mean, you are still the first female ever elected as Grand Chief?
Absolutely. I'm talking to a lot of people within our own community, but also all across Canada. When I meet people, they're very interested to hear about my experience as a female Grand Chief, and people are really encouraged by it, and people saying that they're now interested in entering politics, and also some councillors that are female that have been there for a long time say they feel more included and inclusive of the process. So positive things are happening, and it's not just me. There's lots of many Indigenous women that are leading in different ways, whether it's in leadership at the chief and council level, but also in business and in medicine and different social areas. We're seeing women seem to be rising up in a lot of areas.
Still, there are very few female chiefs in the country. Has gender been something that's played a role in your role over the past year and a half?
For the most part, no. In a positive way, yes, but in a negative way, not so much. I've only basically had one encounter where I felt uncomfortable as a woman from a male chief who, you know, instead of shaking my hand, he made a suggestion to him for that was inappropriate, and I don't think he would have done that to a male leader, and I know for a fact he wouldn't do that to a male leader, but that happened to me almost in the first 6 months of my leadership, and it was really uncomfortable. And there was a female chief, another female chief there at the time, so she addressed it right away, and so we dealt with it that way. But you know, for the most part, I think most people have been really, you know, respectful, and me being a woman is not a big issue.
Let's move to the recent federal budget, the second delivered by the Trudeau Liberals, and a commitment of $3.4 billion new dollars, building on the $8.4 billion mentioned in last year's budget. What are your thoughts on the funding that's been provided this year in building on last's?
Well, I'm hopeful that we'll start to see what those actually mean in terms of how they hit our communities and how they benefit our communities. Right now, I think we're still waiting to see how that happens. And we're hopeful, of course, that there's going to be new funds for housing. It's never going to meet what we need. In northern Manitoba alone, we have the need of about $2 million just for upkeep and repairs. And so that's not even going to scratch the surface of our needs. I think in some communities there's 500 people on the waiting list, and some it's 1,500. So, and I can't imagine what it's like across the country in other communities. So housing is a big area that I know that our leadership is very concerned about. So is education and health. We were hoping to see huge transformation investments into health and actually all the social determinants of health in this budget, but it didn't go the way that we hoped on that level. But at the same time, we're not giving up. We're going to keep asking for what our communities need in terms of proper health transformation that reflects what our communities need, not what the government thinks that we need.
You mentioned some things there, housing, health, education. Was there anything that you were really hoping to see in the budget that just wasn't there?
Well, for sure. I'm working with the Anishinaabe Nation and the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations and MKO. We put a proposal together on Indigenous, we called it the Indigenous Health Alliance, and it is a transformational process for delivering health in our northern communities. And I was hoping that we would see real investments in that transformative process. But there is, I understand, some money for health. We just don't know how it's going to be rolled out. Also jobs. We need a huge infusion of investment on jobs and training, because we have so many beautiful and able-bodied and gifted people in our communities that want to work and that want to make their own way. And I'm telling ministers now and anyone that'll listen that we need more jobs and training, and it is a myth that there are no jobs in our communities in our north, because there is, but we need post-secondary education to do all these jobs, and in a lot of ways, or even at college level. And we are the fastest growing population, and the Conference Board of Canada actually said in Manitoba alone, the Indigenous population is actually the biggest hope for an economic, a bright economic future for this province, and it's because of our Indigenous people. But we're so undertrained, underemployed, and I use also an example all the time. In Winnipeg, for example, our people that need the entry-level jobs are just not getting them. We go through the malls, we go through Tim Hortons and all these other places that, your first jobs, you don't see our kids working in them. And that's just almost racist policies that are affecting our Indigenous people, because we know that new Canadians, for example, get those jobs. We pull up sometimes to Tim's or any other fast food outlet, and there's people that can barely speak English working there, and yet our kids are not. And I've had these hard and awkward conversations with governments and even with the immigrant community themselves, because it's no fault of their own, but I just wanted them to know that this is what we're seeing and feeling, and we need to change that. And I think even around the missing and murdered Indigenous women, one of the biggest things that I see that needs to change is that our women need opportunities, and they need training, and they need education, so they can become independent and they're not dependent on predators and people that will use them to their advantage, but that they will provide for themselves and their children.
MKO has had some of its own financial woes. APTN National News recently reported on an audit conducted into the finances of your predecessor. Do you have concerns with the way some of the money for your organization has been used in the past?
I can't really comment on that. It's a process that we've had to deal with. All I can tell you is that we're in the right direction. We've plugged a lot of the holes that were there, and we're moving on. We can't stay where we were. Our chiefs made a change, and we're going forward, and we're building capacity as much and as fast as we can, so we can be a benefit to our region.
Do you feel MKO is financially stable moving forward?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, of course, there's always challenges because we never have enough resources in the first place to do what we're asked to do and what our communities want us to do. We simply just don't have enough resources, and this is also at the community level. The chiefs and councils face this too with their budgets, where they're asked to do a million things with a very little bit of resources, and so we're challenged with that too. But other than that, I think we're on a good footing and that we're moving forward.
You mentioned those challenges of funding for chiefs, which goes back to the federal budget, and you know the Trudeau Liberals would say they've invested historic amounts of money, $12 billion almost over 2 years. That'll be stretched over a number of years. But do you think good strides are being made in terms of federal investments back into these communities?
Lots of good intentions, lots of good words, and some investments here and there. And what I like about it so far is that they're actually doing some engagements with us, so we can take questions back to our communities and our leadership to give us, you know, the mandate to tell the governments what we would like to see. But ultimately, we would like, and what we're hearing is that, and we would like to see is that government and give the control back to the First Nations, that we can determine our own way forward, and that's just the right thing to do. It's not us begging to have more money. We're saying that give us the control back that is rightfully ours, so we can run our own affairs, because as it is, we see high numbers in child welfare rates, we see high numbers in diabetes, and you know, the high numbers of even third-party managers. And what is all that saying is that this government is doing a poor job managing our affairs and forcing us to try and fit in what they see as the right way to go, and it's not working. And I'm not just talking about this Liberal government, I'm just talking about it in general.
We're speaking with MKO Grand Chief Sheila North Wilson. Time for a quick break. We'll be back with more Face to Face in just a few minutes. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is MKO Grand Chief Sheila North Wilson. Grand Chief, the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women is set to begin hearing testimony next month, an issue close to your heart. What are your hopes and expectations for this inquiry?
The expectations are very high, and I think almost unattainable. But I'm glad it's going forward, because our women and our families deserve their say and their moment to talk about what they see as the issues are, and that's what I'm hoping that'll happen, that women will feel validated, families will be validated, saying what they need to say about what happened to their family members. And I hope that from it we'll see strong recommendations to start to change some of the causes of why things like this keep happening. And for the most part, I think it is because of the way the colonization and residential schools has affected our communities. And so our women, I think, feel disrespected and disregarded a lot of times. And I know I felt like that a lot of times too. And so predators and people in society in general don't have the same respect that they would for other women. And our Indigenous women feel it in more ways than one. And so I hope this inquiry will at least also create a dialogue for the rest of Canada to understand what the issue is, so they can start making changes with their own circles of influence. And we saw that happen in TRC with residential schools, where people were much more aware and much more sympathetic and empathetic to what was actually going on. And so I think more people understand why they see disparaging outcomes in our communities, even on our streets and with homeless people and that. But also I think what people in society and Canadians need to understand, and our own people too, is that this is not just a woman's problem. There's contributors to this problem. Why does it keep happening? Who's on the other side of the problem? And we don't talk enough about predators and the people that are doing the harm to our families. And so we need to do that, and we need to do some introspect too within our own communities on what keeps happening and why we're not doing more to stop the trend. What I am hopeful for, though, is that, and I put a lot of great hope in that, is that we're here because of our Indigenous women and our families who went on the streets, who didn't give up. Sometimes there was 3 people, sometimes there was 300, sometimes 3,000, minus 50, plus 50, all kinds of weather. And people were relentless. They went on the streets and said, we need to talk about this issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. We love our families. We want them back. And they did this nonstop until it became a national election issue, this past federal election. And our chiefs, of course, started talking about it more as well in their own circles. And then just a couple weeks ago, we were at the UN talking about this very issue. And I understood and I realized when I was there that Canada, especially our Indigenous families, lead this discussion around the world on what the issue is, and that we're actually far ahead than a lot of countries in the discussions around it.
There have been some concerns raised about how things have gone so far with the inquiry. Do you share some of those concerns? Absolutely.
I think we need more communications and dialogue from the inquiry itself. I don't know what the issues are. Could be simply logistics and not enough communications expertise. I don't want to say that exclusively, but I think that needs to be brought to another level, because our communities and our families deserve a lot more respect in that way, where they can see what the process is. They need a transparent system. And so if they're not feeling included now, that's going to be a problem. And with such a short time frame that this inquiry is given, this commission is given to do, it is concerning that it's not out there as much as it should be.
There have been other inquiries done and reports done, and hundreds of recommendations that are out there right now. Are there some that are out there right now that you think could be put into place right now to see some change immediately?
Well, of course, the natural thing is to have more resources for counseling and shelters and protection that way. So for self-protection for our women and girls when they're needing help and they need help with that area of violence against them. But we also need access to jobs. We need to start talking to the business community and the industries to start including training programs specifically for our women, so they're not dependent on other people, predators and men that don't have their best interest. We need to start creating training programs for women that will, so they can reach their full potential. Because right now we're setting up people to fail, and we're talking about Indigenous people in general, but more so women. When we tell them, get a job, go to school, but we don't have the proper resources for them to walk into to take these opportunities. It's so lopsided. And so I think if there's a directive from the TRC or the inquiry, I would like to see more resources in terms of creating that independency for our women. I think it will go a long way.
Another major issue touching many First Nation communities, many that you represent, and that's youth suicide, something that's also touched you personally. You've called on Ottawa to take action. What type of action would you like to see?
Well, again, I think it's the lack of opportunities that really affect our people. In my case, with my cousin, Gabe, he did take as much opportunities as was afforded to him, right? He took training. He came to Winnipeg just probably 6 or so months before he passed away. He came and graduated from a heavy-duty course. And so he wanted to work in that area, which he thought that he'd be able to find a job. And he was able to find a job in Thompson, but his family, his wife and his children, they were not comfortable so much living in the city, so they all moved back. And then when they moved back, there was no place for him to work. And so, how does it feel as a man trying to provide for their family, not to find a job to be able to do that? It's got to be degrading. And I felt so bad for him because he actually tried. And he was a good man. He comes from my uncles and my aunts who are athletic, who are York boat racer. He's one of those York boat champions, and he, always participated in games and that. And that's where he comes from. That's where my uncles and my aunts are from. They take a lot of pride in themselves, but yet still, the effects of hopelessness still affected him, because that's what a lot of people feel in our communities is that lack of hope. And there is a lot of beauty also in our communities, and that's why a lot of people stay and don't leave. And I don't blame them, because city life is also very hard. But, we need more opportunities in our community so people are not forced to leave and try and make a go of life somewhere else if they don't want to or don't have to.
All the issues we've touched on here today, we've been speaking about them for a long time. As a journalist, you would have been covering them for a long time. Why do you feel the inaction continues?
Simply racist policies and racist attitudes, I think, towards our people sometimes. And Senator Murray Sinclair said a long time ago, I heard him speak, and I tend to agree, that society learns from an early age, even from home, but also throughout school, that it's okay to disregard the Indians in the classroom or the First Nations kids in the classroom. It's okay to make fun of them. It's okay to, not respect them as much as other kids. And he says he felt that from early school to law school, and all throughout. He was always one of the smartest kids in class, but he was always treated one of the worst in class, no matter how smart he was. And so those people, he says, take that attitude and that perspective into their workplaces when they graduate, where they're judges, lawyers, doctors, business people. And so that spills into how people in society in general feel about us. But at the same time, I know there's lots of good non-Indigenous people that care about our community and work with us. And there is great hope in that. And I think the more we understand each other, the better we'll all be. And I'll, reference another friend of mine, and another chief in Alberta said to me that, 150 years ago we were meant to be extinct, gone, wiped out. 150 years later, we're still here, but we're not just here, we're in every facet of society. Journalism, medicine, business, policing, we're everywhere. Not as much as we want to be in the entry level for our kids, but the ones that persevere, the Indigenous people that persevere, are making a difference. And then who knows, in 150 years we'll be completely turned around and we'll have everything back the way it should be. That's the great hope that I carry.
Grand Chief, I wish we had you for an hour here, but unfortunately we're out of time. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for joining us.